Checkity check.
Check, check. You feeling this?
I'm feeling good.
You know what time it is.
It is time.
To be well now.
Be well now, baby.
Hey, so Dr. Dummar, Nick McGurk, the Curious Patient. Everything you could ever want to know about fasting. I think this is like the trendy topic. It's super intimidating to me. I don't know what's more intimidating, ice baths or fasting, but they both seem pretty intense.
Yeah, well, you're probably fasting if you're bathing anyway, so don't eat and bathe. Don't drink and bathe.
What happens if you take a hot bath and eat at the same time? Is there anything wrong with that?
You know,
I always feel like we're already starting way off topic, aren't we?
Yeah, for sure. But there is this discussion. There is this interesting belief that a lot of people have that if you sit close to a heat source while you're eating, that it's going to spoil your food. I don't know any research on that at all, actually. So I think it's mostly a myth.
But digesting food in like a really hot bath, is that a problem? Sometimes I'll like snack on some popcorn, watch a Netflix movie.
In your bath?
Yeah,
Good
man.
for you, dude.
Dude, I'm a bath connoisseur.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I'm glad you have time for bathing. That's awesome.
It's an important thing is to
It
bathe.
is, yeah.
Okay, fasting.
That came from, was it Asia, bathing?
I think it's a new trend too,
Yeah, bathing.
Daily hygiene. Where is this
Fasting.
Fasting.
Yeah.
I imagine at a Paleolithic level, we didn't always have steady sources of food. So this is probably wired into our DNA. But you want to talk about fasting. You know, is it beneficial? What are the possible harms? And if you want to do it out there, like, what should you know?
Yeah, and the benefits, right?
Yeah.
Potential benefits, because there absolutely are a variety of different benefits that you can glean from fasting. And I like that you mentioned the Paleolithic man, because the reality is when we look at our DNA, I was explaining this to a patient the other day, and it's so interesting because you can look at a child and say, oh my gosh, and then you look at the mother, they have your nose. And that's an interesting phenomena, right? And I think if we really reflect on the significance of that, we'll realize that what we're saying, maybe we're not fully processing it. But what we're saying is that if we go generation back, and maybe 100 years back, and then 1,000 years back, that someone gave us the DNA, the intelligence to create that nose, or we had some way of recreating that same shape, right? So that is why we like to go back and say, what did the Paleolithic man do? Well, somewhere in our DNA is stored information and data of how to endure times of famine and times of fasting, because they were replete in ancient times. It happened all the time, right? There were times of fasting, and then they had to create, methods of storing so that they could maybe eat some type of food during this time of fasting. And their diet became quite limited. They didn't have the abundance and the variety of foods that were available during the plentiful times. And so fasting in our day has now become this almost ritual of reflecting back to our DNA ancestors, the intelligence that they've handed down to us, and saying, this seems to be actually a pretty good practice, because one thing that we know about us is that our current society is overfed and undernourished. So we're overfed completely and undernourished. And so what people are reaching for right now is, what is this in my genetics? That's what they're saying. When they come to me, they're saying, my grandfather had cardiovascular disease, my great-grandfather and whatever else. And so they're saying, this is in my genetics. Well, how much farther back in the genetics do we need to go to be handing down these things as well? At some point, we're exposed to all of the conditions, right? We have heart disease in our line. We can have cardiovascular. We can have liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We can have bowel disease and disorders. At some point, if we go back far enough in our DNA, we're exposed to it all. So the question is, I say to my patients, when we come back now, we learn from our past. We know that there have been moments and times of fasting or of famine that our forebears have experienced, and they managed to propagate the human race to us, at least in some sort of sustainable way, right? And so now what we're looking for is how can we continue to propagate health moving forward. Now we know that there are and we can talk about this, we will probably talk about this as well. We know that there are times when people will have too little nourishment. And by a deficiency, they develop a condition. And we also know on the flip side right now, we see it all around us with too much or getting too much food. We're seeing lots of diseases and ailments of lifestyle largely develop. So people are looking right now for an answer, for a solution to a lot of these ailments and diseases. And I think that we've kind of swung from the famine side to the overfed side. And we're trying to find some balance in the middle of how do I maintain my lifestyle as much as possible, but still glean the benefits that may have been gleaned from lower calorie type diets.
Well, obviously, I would think that you could lose some weight if you fast.
Yeah,
that's the intuitive part of my brain says I don't even know what that just meant. The intuitive part of my brain. It seems like if you eat less food, you would lose weight. Now I know there's more to it than that.
Well, and I love that you said that, because in this article I had to chuckle. There was a statement made specific, and in scientific research,
Only you would have a chuckle reading a research article, by the way.
Yeah, well, listen to this. It's hilarious, okay? Okay. So it was funny because I'm looking at this and I read this sentence, and it basically says, we concluded that reducing calories over an extended period of time reduced the incidence of obesity. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So stop eating and you will lose weight. Well, it sounds really simple, and that's why I laughed, because I was like, well, yeah, if you starve people, of course. But what a lot of people are finding right now is that they are cutting calories. They are cutting things out of their diet, and they're not losing weight. And they're not finding the relief that they want, right? And so they're saying, okay, what's happening here? Why is it that I am not able to actually shed these pounds? And that is something that we need to get to the bottom of. And fasting can actually help with that. One of those things can be the microbiota in the gut. So the gut bacteria culture and the balance in the gut can actually influence the production of neurotransmitters, and it can influence the release of fat, or lipolysis, right? The breaking down of fat in the body. And so if we're in a stage where our bacteria is sending signals that are suggesting that we need to hold on to fat and store it more, then we're not going to be losing that fat that we're suggesting, or that weight that we're trying to lose. So that's one thing. And fasting, especially even fasting mimicking diet that we'll talk about, we're going to talk about a variety of different types of fasting. But certain types of fasting have actually been shown to have a very positive, beneficial effect on gut flora, bacteria.
So where do we start here?
Let's talk about some of the just random, obviously fasting. When I think of fasting,
I would ask you
thousands of years ago.
Okay.
Right? We talked about the Paleolithic man. Fasting in the next instance that I would think about fasting, I would think about some sort of religious practice. People giving something up. In certain religious cultures, they have a practice of, I'm going to give this up. I'm going to fast from this. I'm going to go away from this for something else. And that could even be a media fast, right? Social media or whatever. But other cultures have 24-hour fasts where they say, okay, we're going to fast from, 12 to 12, right? All the way around the clock, full 24 hours, they're going to make sure they fast. And then there are still other cultures who do more like circadian type fasting, where when it's dark, we'll eat. When it's light, we'll fast, right? Because typically your pattern of eating, consuming, and fasting is kind of the opposite, where you'll eat during the daylight hours and then you'll fast during the night hours. That's pretty standard for people. But there are cultures out there that have a celebration every year. Ramadan is part of what I'm referring to as well, where they'll consume after the sun goes down. So while it's a circadian type of a fast, they fast for a month.
What kind of fasting?
So they're staying away from foods. They're staying away from food for that period of time. I don't believe it's I don't believe they're staying away from water. Again, when you see 24-hour, there's another culture, the LDS faith. They stay away from food and water, but they do it for a full 24 hours.
When is that?
Every month. They do it once a month.
That sounds hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's when you do it every month, I guess it becomes something that you just do. But people do talk about it. They mention things like, oh, I can't wait to get home and eat or do this. And, oh, why'd you bring that on Fast Sunday? Or, things like that. But, yes, so there's a variety of cultures that have had traditions of fasting. And it's interesting to me because we look at the fast and we say, what is it that fasting is a representation of? Well, one thing is it's a sacrifice, you could say, and sacrifice is a term that is used in a lot of religious traditions. But it's a sacrifice of something that I might want or even need for my sustaining my health. But I say, okay, I'm going to put this away for a time in hopes that I gain something more. So, and we do this in life all the time, I think. It's the psychological battle or the psychological approach to fasting is essentially, what am I willing to let go of in order to become something more, in order to do something more, right? And so I think that's really where people are and why there's such a fascination right now around fasting is because it's so simple, but it has the potential literally of making more of you and your body than you and your current state or patterns alone would.
So how can it help? Give me a blueprint for an ideal person who could try fasting, what they would do and how it could help them.
Okay. So,
because I have like blood sugar issues.
Yeah, the people
and so you're like, hold off on fasting for a while till we get that figured out.
Yeah, I mentioned to you, when I have blood sugar patients or they have dysregulation, they're not able to properly regulate their blood sugar. Fasting is not always recommended. In fact, I generally recommend it against it until we can heal the cells. Typically, when you have blood sugar issues as well, there's some sort of gut microbiota, bacteria, underlying infection of some sort that's telling the cells and transmitting signals to the brain that you need to consume things that are not in your best interest. And that leads you down a whole rabbit hole where then you try to fast, and not only are you not eating things that are beneficial and good for you, but you're not eating those things that the neurotransmitters are sending signals that you should be eating or that they want you to be eating, right? And then your body starts having a significant amount of other physiological effects. You can even have blood sugar spikes. You can have massive dips, which is frequently what we see happen when people go into hypoglycemia, type of shock even. But the first thing that people really notice is they're just cranky, irritable, they're upset, they're moody, if they skip a meal and there's like, this sucks. I don't want to do this, right? And so we need to be able to work through that. And we have a whole system that we approach, and you're going through it right now. And I think
community health and wellness.
Yeah.
He can get your labs. He can read them. He can give you a whole plan. I'll just testimony real quick because you put me on some natural herbal antibiotics. Yeah. And the cravings have like gone away for sweet foods. Mm-hmm. I'm still hangry after about 2 hours, so I'm excited to see where the journey takes me. You said it's a longer process than just 2 weeks.
Yep.
But it's been really fascinating so far. I would like to get to a place where I could fast.
Yes.
But like my wedding vows, kind of jokingly, it was like, she said, "I'll love you even when you're hangry." And kind of laughed about it. You know what I mean? Hangry is such a colloquial term now that people say. But now that you've explained that, that's actually a pretty not great thing going on in your body when you have the glucose going up and down like that. I took it a lot more seriously. So highly recommend the lab. So you can go to Community
Health and Wellness, or CHWHeber.com.
Okay.
Yep.
I just want to do the quick plug in there for you.
Find us on Instagram, Dr. Ron Dummar, and you can also find us at the Be Well Now podcast for sure. All of those areas. But fasting is something that we want to get our patients to. I want to be able to get all of my patients to a point where their cells and their body can reap the benefits of times and periods of fasting. But again, if I'm working at blood sugar, if I have a blood sugar regulation issue first, I have to do that first. I have to get those cells kind of reprogrammed and healed, essentially. And you and I talked a little bit prior about this, but it's important for people to recognize that we're working with the environment of the body, and let's look at it like a reservoir. And the reservoir that is propagated, the water, can be contaminated. And based on that contamination, we have certain cravings, we have certain ailments, we have anxiety, depression, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We have a variety of different concerns, issues, cardiovascular issues too, that come as a result of the contamination of that reservoir. Well, what we want to do is to begin to introduce things into that reservoir that are going to start cleaning it, clearing the contaminants, and allowing for new life within, new plant life and new underwater plants and plankton and all sorts of things like that. So we want to, first of all, address the environment that the reservoir is, right? And as we start to change those cells, now part of that is only going to happen if we have a good, clean source of water pouring in. If we have a poor quality source of water coming in, well, then it's a problem.
So like you have to start doing the right nutrition as you're cleaning the reservoir?
Yeah, you have to start doing the right nutrition. You have to start doing, making sure that you're consuming the foods that are going to be more nourishing for you and beneficial, making sure that you're getting any specific nutrients. And sometimes, in certain cases, I'd say it's very rare, but in certain cases, we actually do have patients on some medications as a temporary measure until we can wean off of those and reduce them. But we want to make sure we get that reservoir clear and that what we're putting into it is also clear and clean, because one of the other inputs that's coming into that reservoir is the new production of blood cells in our body. And this new production of blood cells, we want to make sure that they're not going to be contaminated as well, or that they have as little chance as possible for contamination. And if we can keep that new blood cell kind of nourished and protected from that, then we're in really good shape. And what's going to happen is it's not going to be sending or receiving the signals or having the need necessarily, transmitting that need to you or your body, that you have to be consuming foods that aren't in your best interest. And so in your case, right, your body is producing new blood cells. Every 140 days, we turn over our blood cells. Like a blood cell lifespan is 140 days. So, usually plan on 3 to 6 months for some sort of legitimate, significant change.
Because I'm eating my order right, and we'll get to fasting in a second. But there may be a lot of people out there. I mean, you know better than I. Are there a lot of people with blood sugar issues out there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So I'm not alone.
Yes, especially in the U.S. in our country, it happens way more than I think, more than we think.
Yeah.
Very common.
So the order is veggies first, then proteins, then carbs when you eat. Like I'm doing that. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to eliminate all sweets. I feel like I'm doing it all right, and I still get real hungry and cranky after a couple hours.
Yeah.
And I came to you today. I'm like, when's it gonna change? I'm trying so hard, and you said 140 days with the cells. So that gives me a better outlook. So you may be 3 to 6 months away from trying fasting, but there's hope. And hit up Dr. Ron Dummar if you want some help. You can do this all remotely as well.
And some people change faster. It's
exactly.
That's the key. Is we want to change faster. The 140 days, that 3 to 6 month mark. That's where I want you to set your mind as far as saying, hey, I'm at least going 3 to 6 months, like guaranteed, no way. Like I'm on for that, right?
Like I'm committed.
Yeah, and
my whole life to get here took a long time.
We're trying to change lifestyle.
Man.
And it's a slower process. You don't change lifestyle by just a fast, aggressive cut. And granted, there are some people who make and can make really fast, aggressive, quick changes in their life. But really, when we're talking about changing the cells and changing your lifestyle, it's little by little.
So if you're not someone with blood sugar issues, you'd be a candidate for fasting. What would you recommend? How would you recommend somebody try to fast for the first time?
Right. So fasting for the first time is usually easiest if you do time-restricted feeding, which essentially means that you're going to, for a certain period of time, not consume food, okay? Any calories. So the easiest time to do this is actually when you sleep, which means that basically, unless you're getting up every hour and doing, having midnight and late night snacks, then you're fasting when you sleep. So what you can do, if you sleep for somewhere between 6 and 8 hours a night, what you can do is on the early end, like the evening, finish your dinner earlier, and then don't consume anything until breakfast the next morning. So you extend essentially both ends of those. So your breakfast, you push a little later, your dinner, you push a little earlier. And what you're aiming for with the time-restricted feeding is to be somewhere between 12 and 18 hours a day of fasting. Now, during that time, you can drink water. You can drink fluid, but not carbs in your water. Just water if you're going to do that fasting, or not water at all.
So that could be like an early dinner. Mm-hmm. You're done by, I don't know.
7 even?
7?
6?
Yeah, because 7 to 7 would be 12 hours.
Right.
So if you're above 12, you're saying, so you could eat breakfast at 9. I'm just thinking, like, this sounds very doable to me.
Exactly. And so I like to introduce fasting to patients this way, because even for blood sugar patients, this is fasting. So then we say, okay, well, how many hours can I add on to either end of that to increase the amount of hours during the day that I'm fasting? There was research that was done on rats on a fasting window, and they found that those who had they consumed the same amount of calories. One was like high fat diet, high calorie, and the other one was like high carb, high calorie diet. Okay, and what they found was that if they had these mice consume within a certain amount of time, they had a more narrow window of consuming. There was almost no difference between what they were consuming, whether they were doing a high fat or a high carb diet. Does that make sense? And so there's something to fasting and for improving or increasing that fasting window that allows our body to begin to kind of consume what's breaking down and release it, right? And to begin the process of repair. Well, one of the words we use for this idea or this phenomena of inner consuming and breaking down, eliminating, repairing is autophagy. And autophagy is really what we're going for and what we're aiming to achieve by fasting. And this is like self-consumption, right? Autophagy, self-eating. Okay, well, that's when we get our body to the point where it begins to consume the dross, or what is not needed anymore, and eliminate it. That's autophagy. And so fasting elicits that. Another way that you could start fasting, especially if you do have blood sugar issues and you're wanting to attempt fasting, and you've been really trying to manage your blood sugar well and think that, hey, I could probably do this, would be juice fasting. Because, well, it's juice, which means you're going to be getting some sugars, some level of sugars as well in it. And it's not like, pineapple juice and guava and, go buy off the store shelf. It's actually like carrot juice, celery juice, and juicing at home with a juicer like apples and things like that too. And there are a variety of different recipes, but that's an easy way that you can begin fasting as well, is to say, okay, I'm going to fast from certain foods like processed carbs and processed sugars and refined breads and things like that. So you can put those away for a time and say, okay, I can begin fasting by doing these things. So other ways of fasting. There are 3 main types of fasting that I think it would be good for us to talk about or to hit on, and that is fasting. One of them we mentioned already, called fasting mimicking diet. And then there's...
that's when you don't eat for 12 to 18 hours.
No. Fasting mimicking diet is where once a month, essentially, you choose 5 days to fast. So you fast for 5 days of every month, but it's really, your fast is restricting calories. That's the fasting mimicking diet. So it's trying to mimic what you would get from fasting. And so what they do is they say, okay, for 5 days, let's say day 1, we want you to drop your amount of calorie intake like 40%. And essentially usually it's around 1,100 calories. Drop it to 1,100 calories. And then we say, okay, now from day 2 to day 5, we want you to drop that to between 500 and 700 calories. Well, that's a significant calorie restriction, and it's for a full 5 days. That's how fasting mimicking diet works. But the research shows that those individuals who undertake that style of fasting, they do it, once a month, or they'll do it when they can, once a quarter. But those who did it seem to do it once a month benefited in the very similar way as others doing such things as like intermittent fasting or doing time-restricted feeding, which is what we talked about with the rats and the mice. The time-restricted feeding being the window of consumption when we actually allow ourselves to eat food, but don't even pay attention to calories at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So time-restricted feeding, that's another one. It's a form of fasting. But essentially, we look at saying we're consuming food within a certain window, and we're not even paying attention to how many calories. We want the food to be quality still, but we're not paying attention to necessarily how many calories. And people who do this, if you can get your window of fasting to 12 to 18 hours, you start losing weight. You start clearing toxins. You start eliminating and reducing your chance of autoimmune disease, of inflammation in the gut and the GI.
By doing what?
By fasting, right? So if you get your window of fasting between 12 and 18 hours a day, even though you haven't changed the amount of calories that you're taking in every day, you're going to fast for long enough. So let me say it this way. This is help you understand what happens to the body and why it's getting into this autophagy phase. One of the things that, let's say I eat, my last meal is at 8 o'clock. Okay, well, it takes basically like a full 8 hours just to consume the energy from that last meal, right? So if I wake up within 8 hours and the first thing I do is eat, It's zero. You see what I'm saying? As far as net gain, I'm not losing anything or gaining anything. I wake up, I eat. Okay, now here's more energy for me. We have to get the body into a point where the energy that is put into the stomach is consumed, and then it says, now what? Right? Now what? Okay, we have to look for energy other places. We have to find it in fats, right? So this is ketosis. Like, people love the ketogenic diet. We can find it in muscle. We can find it in a variety of different places where we can start pulling our energy sources from. So that's what we have to do. We have to fast for long enough to get the body to begin to initiate that process of saying, oh, I need to start pulling energy from other places. And that happens only after about 8 hours of fasting. So if all you're doing is sleeping again for 6 to 8 hours, and you wake up and then you have a meal again, you eat something right away, well, you're constantly at a baseline, you're not going to change anything. It's going to be really difficult. So is the
solution to not eat breakfast? Because a lot of people skip breakfast, and then they say you shouldn't skip breakfast, and that's a tough one. It sounds more nuanced.
So let me say this in a different way too. People are saying you shouldn't skip breakfast. If you do have breakfast, what should you eat for breakfast? I would say it would be more of protein. You'd want like protein and maybe even some veggies with it, right? But not what we typically eat, which is carbs and sugars and juices and things like that. That's not really what a breakfast should consist of. But as far as breakfast, what does that word mean?
Break fast.
We're breaking our fast. So whoever determined when break fast had to be? We're only saying that we're calling it breakfast because we know we fast at night. We know we fast at night because that's a period of sleeping. So really what you should say and what the trend should be is that the most important meal of the day is breakfast, yes, but that does not have to be in the morning. Okay? So our association with breakfast in the AM, like before noon, that means it doesn't even make sense to me. All it means really, breakfast, is that you're breaking your fast. And with that idea now saying, okay, we don't have to tag breakfast to a specific time of the day. Breakfast can be any time. It can be any time we choose. It's not just a morning thing. If we can step away from that idea, first of all, it's going to help us a lot. Breakfast, I mean, what do you say? What do you think in your brain when I say breakfast? Most people go, oh, morning. They think morning automatically. Sometimes they think early. Coffee, right? How do I get going? Those are the things they think of, right? But you don't have to. The morning does not have to be that way. Like, breakfast does not have to occur in the morning, period. And so the key with break fast is that we need to recognize that we're literally breaking a fast. And hopefully our fast has gotten us to this point of autophagy where we've begun to clean our blood and clean our cells and empty what doesn't need to be in there, right? We've broken down and consumed cells and the debris within the body that would just cause inflammation if we continued to perpetuate that way without a rest and without fast. And so what we need to make sure of is that first meal, and this is why it's the most important, after the one where we've been cleaning and cleansing and purifying, that first meal now has got to be as healthy and as focused and as nourishing, not just feeding, but nourishing as possible. So think about what gives you energy. What's the highest amount of energy? Is it in a carbohydrate? Is it in a fat? Like, what has a higher amount of energy, carbohydrates or fat?
Fat.
Fat is essentially the highest amount of energy. So in our morning, if we can have high quality fat for breakfast, when we break our fast, then we're going to contribute to providing ourselves with a significant amount of energy as well throughout that day.
So if you can get more than 8 hours
of sleep or of fasting?
What's a good rule of ideal fasting?
12 to 18 hours is
a day?
Yeah. That's what you're aiming for.
So optimal health, if you could go 12 hours between dinner and breakfast, you'd recommend that?
Yeah, and that's time restricted feeding.
Okay,
right?
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's also a principle of intermittent fasting though too. So, and this is the idea, is that we want to restrict our intake to a certain window so that our body has time to rest and recover, and then to begin to actually perform those functions that are going to help it to heal. It has to work on itself too.
So if I eat more than that, it's interfering with healing?
Yes. Because it's preventing your body. It prevents because all you're doing is taking up more energy. And you never get to this point of just taking on energy and then resting, because you're constantly consuming. That's why I say we're overfed. Because we're overfed because we don't allow ourselves to get to the point of actually gaining the benefits of sleep, which should be fasting. And to gain those benefits, it has to be 8 to 12 hours of sleep, like minimum, without food.
8 to 12 hours of sleep or time?
8 to 12 hours of time, of fasting time without food is a minimum for us to actually consume all of the glucose, the sugars, the energy that was just consumed from our last meal.
Is it more powerful to fast during the day than it would be to, I think of like cheating between like dinner and breakfast the next day? Like if from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. I didn't eat anything, that would be harder for me than 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Right.
Is that better? If it's harder, is it better?
I can't say that. I wouldn't say that, but it's more challenging on the body. And I have done that. I have fasted that way, where in the morning till the evening, you have an evening meal, right? And you have a morning meal, and those are the only two meals. I have done that. Not necessarily always, the times that I've done it haven't necessarily always been planned. Let's put it that way. But I have done it as well. And I think that those moments of fasting, again, if we can get them to be at least 12 hours, that's the ideal. It's bare minimum is 8, right? But if we can get them to be at least 12 and between 12 and 18, we're going to initiate the process within our body that begins the process of healing and recovery and tissue regeneration. And the research actually shows that people who fast and allow themselves this amount of time to fast, they have signals within their body. They have signals within their body that begin to take place that reduce aging. They slow the aging process. And we know that this is occurring. The people who fast slow their aging process. Now, there is some assumption as well that they actually gain years. We don't totally know that yet with the research, but what we do know is that the process of aging and deterioration of the cells is slowing. And so that's a really huge benefit to fasting. Another really neat benefit is if you fast, let's say you're undergoing cancer treatment, cancer patients benefited from fasting, from fasting for 3 days leading up to their cancer treatment. Okay. And what they found was, and again, this is the window of fasting. What they found was these patients who fasted for 3 days leading up to their cancer treatment, they had their cells, their own body cells, had greater resistance to the toxicity of the chemotherapeutic agents that were being utilized. And it appeared that the tumors themselves were more susceptible to the chemotherapeutic agents that were being used, which means ultimately that the person did far better receiving the treatment and not receiving or not taking on the negative benefits or harms of the therapeutic agent.
Like not eating for 3 days?
So they fasted like a fasting window. So they didn't do...
Which is time-restricted fasting?
Time-restricted fasting.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
So is that something that anyone could do? Like,
yeah.
So if I just try to like delay the time I eat breakfast and I'm starting to feel hangry and a little anxious, is that bad for me?
Well, so if you can manage it and you say, okay, I'm going to go an hour and you're doing okay, you're feeling a little hangry. Well, you're used to that. That's probably, well, I get this all the time if I skip a meal. Well, you skip a meal, but what I'm more concerned about is if you're getting faint, right? Or if you're, those signs like of feeling irritable, feeling moody, feeling frustrated and emotional, if you skip a meal, those are signs of low blood sugar. So your blood sugar drops significantly, which means you're not regulating your blood sugar well enough. So if that's occurring for you, can you fast? The answer to that really is yes. But like some of the recommendations we said before, maybe just try stretching those windows before and after. Like try opening that up and see how you feel. If you can, and you're like, man, I went to 9 o'clock. Okay, great. But don't just say, oh, tomorrow, I usually eat at 7 a.m., but tomorrow I'm going to eat at 10. No, don't do that to yourself. Maybe stretch it. Say, I usually eat at 7. I'll try eating at 7:30 or 8 o'clock next. And then just kind of push it gradually each day or even, every other day until finally you're like, actually, I'm doing pretty good. And that level of fasting will have an impact as well on the gut and the GI and the bacterial species in the gut, right? But again, the key is with regards to blood sugar and fasting and being hangry and everything is regulating your blood sugar and making sure if you have any sort of pathogenic factor in there that you're resolving that issue first.
So fasting is not just about losing weight. It sounds like there's a lot of benefits. Mental health benefits?
Oh, absolutely. So anxiety and depression was reduced significantly by those who fasted. And one of the reasons for that, again, is the effect that it has on the gut. And the gut contains and produces 95+% of our serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. That's like the bearings on the wheels of the nervous system. So if we're performing in an efficient way, because we have a sufficient supply of serotonin, then we're going to feel good. We're going to feel optimal, and we're not going to have these anxious, anxiety type sensations and feelings. But if we have a disruption in the gut flora and the GI, then it's very likely we will. Also, this is something that people I think will find very beneficial. Those individuals as well who were fasting had lower incidences, or who practiced fasting, lower incidences of the onset of other neurodegenerative diseases. Okay, it's like Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so patients had a reduction in the onset of Alzheimer's disease when they practiced fasting.
So Alzheimer's could be prevented by fasting?
Mm-hmm. So Alzheimer's is, in a lot of neurodegenerative diseases, it's inflammation-based. And fasting can actually reduce the level of inflammation that your body is secreting and producing. And so if you practice fasting, you're going to reduce your inflammation overall, and then your nerves have a greater protection against the neuroinflammatory degradation.
Doesn't fasting stress your body out though? Wouldn't you think it'd be harder on your body?
So it's like doing a workout. I would say your body needs to be attuned, so to speak. I look around sometimes. Here, another article that I read, super interesting. It was talking about how high alpine athletes and athletes that have, like with cold exposure and different things like this, it actually has an influence on blood sugar. So simply exposing yourself to cold, you think we're going to go back to Wim Hof all of a sudden, right? So cold exposure, but it helps the body with utilizing sugars appropriately, right? And it prevents spikes and dips, even just doing that.
I wasn't going to tell you, but I'm back to the cold showers.
Yeah, there you go.
I thought you'd say one baby step at a time. Living life on the edge.
Well, I know how you do things. You like to do it full bore.
All in,
Get
baby.
after it.
Get after it. I think you have to go run and be a dad.
My son is in a concert tonight, so I've got to go get him there. And he's a hard worker, and he skis and plays soccer, and he's an artist as well, apparently, a musician. So,
and he was a baby at one point, and then they just start to grow up, and it's wild to watch.
When did that happen, right?
While you were over here podcasting.
Seriously, all this wasted time?
Dereliction of duty? No. Okay, good stuff. So fasting sounds like an amazing thing that I want to try at some point, and that I hope everyone out there learns something about. Do you have any final thoughts? It's an invitation for another hour if I ask you that.
I don't today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, I appreciate that.
Fair enough. We'll take it, right?
I'll take it. I'll take it where I can get it. Hey, that was fun, guys. Hopefully everybody feels like they can be well now.
Be well now.
Namaste.
Namaste.